I'm Noah Abrams, and welcome to The Days Between, the show where I talk to my friends, people I admire, and people I want to better understand about success, failure, happiness, and misery, as well as all the other elements that make up a life well lived. Along the way, we'll look at mental, spiritual, and physical health, and when life didn't go as planned, the steps they took to get themselves from A to B and beyond. This week, I'm speaking with Liz Lambert. If you visited Austin's South Congress over the last 20 years, chances are you have Liz to thank, though you may not realize it. While the pandemic certainly escalated the migration to the live music capital of the world, the trend began far earlier, and one could argue that a seafoam green motel was the spark that ignited a wildfire. Shortly after leaving the Manhattan District Attorney's Office and returning to her home state of Texas, Liz found herself standing in the parking lot of the Hotel San José, with a bottle of champagne in one hand and the keys to the front door in the other, with nothing more than instinct and her fundamental understanding of what Christopher Alexander called the quality without a name to guide her. A trained storyteller, not even Liz could have written the adventure that would follow, which culminated in her transforming over half a dozen properties throughout Texas and Mexico, as well as establishing herself as one of the most influential hoteliers of our time, only to see her legacy taken from her in a twist even Liz admits she didn't see coming. It's easy to draw parallels between Liz's experience and that of the town she helped to make famous, but as with any hero's journey, the road back leads to resurrection, and it's safe to say both stories are far from over. Often imitated, but never duplicated, please enjoy Liz Lambert on The Days Between. So I'm here in Austin, Texas with Liz Lambert. You have certainly made a name for yourself here in Austin and done quite a bit of business here, but you're not originally from Austin.
No, I'm not. I'm from West Texas.
Whereabouts in West Texas?
From Odessa, part of the Permian Basin. I don't know that a lot of people know exactly where Odessa is, but a lot of the nation's oil comes from Odessa. So it's a real boom or bust sort of West Texas, flat, tumbleweedy town.
Any siblings?
I had three brothers. I lost two of my three brothers about 20 years ago, within 4 months of each other. So one healthy sibling that I make sure is in good shape all the time.
I've heard you tell a story about your grandfather Yule doing business out of the Lincoln Hotel.
That is true.
And that's starting your love of hotels.
I think that's probably exactly right. I mean, it was my first fascination with hotels, and it was lobbies of hotels. My granddad was a rancher, and he didn't have an office in town. You know, back then, hotels like the Lincoln in downtown Odessa, you could get your shoes shined there, you could get a haircut there, go to lunch. We went to lunch every other Sunday there at the Lincoln Hotel. But my granddad would take meetings in the lobby of the hotel, and he would sit and read the newspaper, and, you know, he just kind of posted up there for the day. And when I was young, I mean, I guess 4, 5, 6, he would sometimes take me with him to the Lincoln, and I loved the bustle of the hotel, you know, all the things that went on in the lobby, and, you know, people coming and going, people that were definitely locals there, but there were, you know, foreigners, meaning people from outside of West Texas.
Did that carry on through junior high, high school?
Oh, yeah. My mom also loved hotels. And so we would travel. We would go into Fort Worth. We would go to Dallas. We would, you know, later go to New York. My mom always wanted to stay in a hotel that had a big lobby, that it was an experience, that you could eat dinner, you could have breakfast in the tea room or whatever. And so, yeah, I think from both my granddad and my mother, I learned a love of hotels. You know, my mom and my granddad and my grandmom were at the Texas Hotel the day that Kennedy was shot. They had taken the train in from Odessa to Fort Worth to go see the doctor, go shopping, do all that kind of stuff. And so they arrived like 7 o'clock in the morning, and they were waiting in the lobby while the room was being prepared, or, you know, they were waiting for somebody to check out. And Kennedy came down on the elevator with, I guess, Conley and Wright. I don't know who all was with him that day, but he came out to the parking lot at the Texas Hotel and gave a speech. And my mom was there. She was probably 30. My granddad pushed her forward to shake Kennedy's hand, and she did. And then after that, he took off for Dallas.
You graduated from high school in Odessa
Yes.
and then went to TCU?
Yes.
Why TCU?
My parents met at TCU. My dad played football for TCU. My oldest brother played football for TCU. And actually, Yule, the same grandfather, played football for TCU. I didn't last very long there. I think I was there for a year and a semester, maybe.
And then where'd you go?
I did a very brief stint at Stanford, and then I ended up at UT here in Austin.
And how did you find UT?
So great. I mean, it was meant to be. I don't know, how I started out somewhere else. I mean, Austin I guess that was the 80s, early mid 80s. Austin I felt like it was made for me, or I was made for it, whichever way it went. Austin is a place that I think every kid of my generation went if you were a little bit different, if you were a little bit of an outlaw, if you were nonconformist in any sort of way, all roads led to Austin.
And then you finished at UT and applied to Sarah Lawrence to get your MFA?
Oh, that's right. You knew that, yes. After college, I thought I would go and get my MFA in creative writing and into a poetry program, and I didn't get in. I think they took like 13 people that year, and I didn't get in. And so I cast about a little bit, and I took an internship at Texas Monthly. And so I worked at Texas Monthly as an intern, I think, for 6 months or so, and then I actually got a brief paying job there, and during that time I applied to go to law school.
Why law school?
I'm not sure why law school. It felt like it was a graduate education, and it felt like a pretty broad education. I didn't really think that I would actually ever practice law.
Well, you said of it that you were concerned that learning to think logically would dampen the ability to be creative. Did you find that to be the case?
No, but I really thought that at the time. I was really worried that if I spent 3 years in law school, that it might really take away any creativity I had.
So you finished law school, and then where'd you head?
From law school, I went to the DA's office in Manhattan. I mean, I guess I didn't see that coming, but that's where I ended up.
And how long were you at the DA's office?
Almost 4 years, I think, about 3.5. When you go to the DA's office, and probably still the case in Manhattan, you do misdemeanors for a while until you level up and start to try felonies, and then you're presenting cases to the grand jury. And so I think it's a little after 2 years that you do that. And then at that point, you proceed on to taking on murders and really high-level crime. And there was just sort of natural attrition at that point for a lot of us.
Now, you've said that you were the first openly gay person to be hired by the Manhattan DA's office in 1991.
That's true. I mean, that may not completely be true. There was me and one other guy that were openly gay in that year that I was hired at the DA's office. It didn't mean that I was the only gay person there, or he was. There were just two of us. Far from it. There were plenty of gay people there. Just no one was out. They had tapped a liaison to the lesbian and gay community in the couple of years before that. It was the early 90s, so it was a time of a lot more activism in the gay community because of AIDS. And ACT UP was really, really active. They were recruiting. They weren't really recruiting gay candidates. They were just, there was a place for you to land and to understand that you could be out if you took that job.
Why would you go to the DA's office over, let's say, like the public defender's office?
Well, actually, I interviewed at both, and I had an offer in New York, it's Legal Aid, and I had an offer from Legal Aid and from the DA's office. At the time, I felt like anybody with my politics particularly would go to Legal Aid. But to me, the DA's office was actually where the power was. It was the office that decided whether or not to try a case, what would be prosecuted, what wouldn't. And again, I was actually at the time a member of ACT UP. And so it was way more interesting to me to go to the DA's office than it was to go to Legal Aid.
So you were there for almost 4 years. What brought you back to Texas?
Like I said, I think it was a sort of natural attrition, understanding that I was about to go on the homicide chart and understanding that it was just way more of a commitment to stay at the DA's office It was more of a career choice. I also think I'm a Texas girl, and I belonged back in Texas. I missed it, and I think you can also talk to people who have moved to New York from somewhere else, and I think there's a period of time at which you make a choice to either really become a New Yorker or move on. And it felt like around that 3 to 4 years was about the right period of time.
And you came back to Austin.
Yes.
And what did you decide to do?
When I came back to Austin with my girlfriend at the time, she was also a lawyer. I didn't have a job right away. I had started applying at different law jobs. And the one I eventually got was at the Attorney General's office here in Austin in general litigation.
What was that like?
Interesting. I mean, it was actually trying, bigger and longer cases and kind of traveling all over Texas to try those cases. Things that fall into general litigation at the AG's office are everything from questions of Texas constitutional law, 1983 actions, Title VII stuff, just a broad range of general litigation. And it meant that I was trying cases at the state level and also at the federal level. But I was traveling a whole lot, and I was going and living out of a Motel 6 for 2 or 3 weeks to try a case, which wasn't all that glamorous.
Well, what was going on with you personally at this point? I mean, were you satisfied practicing law in that capacity? And were you thinking this is what you were going to do?
No, I wasn't really satisfied practicing law. I mean, I liked trying cases. I liked being a trial lawyer. It really satisfied a lot of things for me. But, and there is a certain creativity in being a trial lawyer. I was much more fascinated at the DA's office about criminal law in general. And why do we make some things a crime? There's a Carolyn Forche poem that says there's no thing one man won't do to another. And, there's something sort of fascinating about thinking, a lot of criminal law goes back to what your mens rea was. What was your mindset? What did you know at the time? And ideas of right and wrong. That said, it was also a really hard thing because it was almost immediately when I got to the DA's office, I realized how much the criminal justice system needs to be just upended in this country. There's so much that's tied to socioeconomic levels, access to education and to healthcare, to our communities in general. And that got a little bit wearing after a period of time. As far as being here at the Attorney General's office, I wasn't all that interested in the kind of cases I was trying, and I didn't care a lot either about the subject matter, or I felt like anybody else could do this. It wasn't something I felt called to at all. And so I sort of started looking around for what else I could do, pretty much a few months in from the time I got to the Attorney General's office.
And what kind of stuff were you looking at?
I didn't really know. I mean, one of the first things we did when we got back to Austin was to buy a house here in Travis Heights in the neighborhood that is right on the edge of where we're sitting now at my office off of South Congress. And at the time, houses were cheap. It was the 90s at that point, 94, 95, 94. Houses were still cheap, and you could actually buy something in Austin.
And just for context, for the people that aren't familiar with Austin, what is Travis Heights now?
I mean, Travis Heights right now is exploded. I mean, the real estate market in Austin is nuts. I think it's up over last year, about 33% or so. I read a statistic the other day that 180 people were moving to Austin per day. The real estate market is on fire. If you can find something, usually it's going for 30, 40% over asking. So Travis Heights would be right on that list of a desirable place for people to live. About the lot and the small house that I lived in until a year and a half ago for $63,000. And we then moved a house onto the lot, which is something you can do in Texas. I know that for a lot of your listeners, they're like, you did what? And yeah, we moved a house that was probably built in the 30s or 40s, 10 miles or so, to the lot that I had paid $63,000 for. It's hovered it above the ground and poured piers into the ground and then set the house down. And by the way, it was the second time that house had moved. So it's still there right now. But this neighborhood has just exploded. And, South Congress, which the office we're sitting in right now, it's a completely different beast than the South Congress that was here when I landed in Austin in 1994 or 95.
You've said that around that time, a friend of yours, a close friend, had died of complications related to AIDS, and that had shocked you into doing what you had wanted to do because that was basically the first time you had faced mortality.
That's true. Right around the time I moved back to Austin, I had a friend who had been a friend from way before, who actually Tony Winnick, who was married to Marion Winnick, who's a writer that used to live in Austin. Tony had been sick with HIV for some time, and in that first year or two, when I was working at the AG's office, I guess the first year, Tony got sick and went to hospice and eventually died from AIDS-related causes. And it was just shook me up completely. It was the first time I'd ever faced mortality, particularly among somebody who was a peer. And it really made me realize that whatever I was doing, it should be something that meant something to me. And if I had the ways and means to do that, I shouldn't just be asleep at the wheel. I needed to make those changes.
And so how did that manifest itself?
Well, I used to spend a lot of time at the Continental Club. The Continental Club is a legendary live music venue that's been open since about 1950s. For a period of time, there was really no businesses open on South Congress. Just a smattering of, like a tile company or a mortgage office. But the Continental Club had been there and had never closed its doors and had amazing live music. And I spent a lot of time there when I was a lawyer in the mid-90s. In Austin. And across the street, directly across the street from the Continental Club, was the San José Motel and all of its sea foam green glory. And I would look at it across the street and wonder about it. It never seemed like there were any cars there. And you wouldn't see that many people coming and going. So, I wondered about it a lot, actually. And so one day one evening probably, I went and knocked on the door. There was a glass door, and then there was once you went into the little tiny vestibule, there was a glass partition with a place you could slide your money through. And I asked them if they would ever consider selling. And I don't remember if it was Mr. or Mrs. Sue that had that talked to me, and they said they were actually about to put it in the Chinese newspaper the next week. I said thanks, and then I went out and called the one real estate agent I knew and asked him if he could go by and try to see whether we could put an offer on the motel.
And at that time, what did you know about running a hotel?
I knew absolutely zero about running a hotel.
Were you looking at this as like a side hustle or a change of career? Were you still practicing law at that time?
Yes. I looked at it as a side hustle. I thought I could fully keep my job as a lawyer. I mean, I had been able to move this house onto the lot and redo that. And that's actually what I was most fascinated with, is like the process of moving the house onto the lot and then kind of stripping it down to the studs and rebuilding it. I loved it. And so I think the motel at the time seemed to be just a bigger version of that. When I finally got the realtor to get their attention, I think they were asking $550,000. I talked my mom somehow into co-signing a note for me. I knew nothing about business. I mean, I had managed to graduate from the University of Texas without ever taking a business class or a math class. And I just figured I could make it work. I mean, I had a lot of confidence, and part of that confidence was born from not knowing enough. It's one of those situations where I think, thank God I didn't know what I didn't know, because I would have thought, oh, I can't do that. But again, I hadn't seen anybody really coming and going from the hotel much, and I didn't figure it would be that hard. It was in November of 1995, and I met with the Sues at it was this Taiwanese couple that had owned the place, and they'd had it for a while. The San Jose Motel had opened in 1936 and had run as a motel until the day I bought it, and I never intended to close it. I thought I could redo it room by room. I didn't have these big plans for it. So the Sues were the most recent owners. They were Taiwanese, and they had a daughter that had just graduated from medical school in Houston. And so they were moving to Houston. When we closed on the property, like I drove into the parking lot, they were there. They handed me the keys. I had some champagne. They had zero interest in having the champagne. And I was suddenly had a full motel, and I was standing there with the keys, and like there were no computer records of anything. Everything was done by hand with pencil, and there were no credit card machines. It was like I had no fucking idea what I was doing, and I suddenly had a motel.
What did that feel like?
Kind of crazy, but let me also remind you again, I didn't know what I didn't know. I had no idea like what would go on there at night or during the day, or I didn't know.
Earlier this year, 2021, South by Southwest, you premiered your documentary Through the Plexiglass, The Last Days of the San Jose, which documents your journey converting this hotel and more specifically, the inhabitants of this hotel. And I don't want to ruin the film for the people that haven't seen it, but one of the things that really struck me in watching the film was the compassion and respect that you had for the residents of the hotel. There's quite a few scenes where a camera is set up literally behind the plexiglass, and it records these conversations you have with these people. And, you know, these people are using drugs in your hotel. There are prostitutes.
Nothing ever changes.
Fair enough.
Just the prices.
But what really struck me is that there was never any disdain for these people. There was never any judgment. You know, it's clear in the film that you're not making money, that you're losing money. And there's certainly a struggle on your part. You know, and there's even a point where you're helping tie someone's tie. And I don't want to ruin the ending for people, but ultimately you get to a point where you have to kick everyone out.
Right.
And you say in the film, you know, I never intended to be a landlord, but I can say that in my experience, I have never seen a landlord evict people and have those people turn around and give the landlord flowers and a cake.
That was really, really sweet. So I ended up quitting my law job eventually after maybe a year of trying to raise money to redo the hotel room by room. I figured if I went to work at the front desk at the hotel, I would have nothing but time to try to figure out how to raise the money to redo the motel. And in the first few weeks, I would come home and tell friends and family like the craziest stories about what happened that day. And they're like, you should be writing this down. You should be writing this down. And I'm like, I don't have time to journal about this, you know? So I bought a camera out of the back of like B&H or something like that. And they had just come out with the Sony PC7, which is a camera kind of the size of 4 iPhones or something. And it had a little screen that came out. And I just started carrying it around with me. I had no idea what I would do with footage eventually, but I really felt like it should be documented. I had 2 friends that were at AFI at the time. So those guys were in film school. And so I kept asking them as time went on and as I was shooting footage, you know, should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? Should I have a big microphone? Like, what if people can't hear? And they both reassured me that if what I got on tape was interesting enough, the story could carry itself. And so by the time we shut the motel down for renovations, I had about 90 hours of footage, and which I still have, that should be archived somewhere, because it's not just the story of the inhabitants of the hotel and not just my story and my struggle at trying to figure out how to convince anybody to loan me money to redo the San Jose motel, but it's also the story of Austin at that time, because with that much footage, you see a lot of South Congress, and the people that don't know what South Congress was would not believe the transformation in the last 20 years. When the film premiered at South by Southwest this year, I got a few good reviews. I got also some serious, you know, hater sort of stuff. I did like a few DMs and like a really bad review of people that were mad, that thought I had gentrified all of South Austin, South Congress, and really run these people out of their home on South Congress. But what those people clearly don't realize, or, I guess I'm going to be generous to say they don't realize that if they knew the dangerous situation that was going on South Congress in general at the time when I arrived there, nobody would want it to stay the way it was then. I mean, I don't want it to be the way it is now. In 20 years, it's grown way too fast. That's out of my hands, obviously. But it was not a safe place to come, at that time in the late 90s. It was also, nobody was down here. I remember the day that I called Steve Wertheimer, who owned the Continental Club, because we had become friends, and he was one of my first investors in the San Jose. And I was like, Steve, there are people parked on South Congress. I can see like 5 cars on the street. He's like, what?
So the film ends with you shutting down the hotel for renovations. You have obviously gone on to renovate that hotel and several others. One of the most notable things in my experience about your hotels or any space that you've ever touched is the overall vibe of the hotel. I mean, it is very obvious where Liz Lambert has put her hand.
Thanks, Noah.
You have credited Christopher Alexander's books as influences, specifically a pattern language and a timeless way of building. And I was wondering if you could expand a little bit about his influences on your design aesthetic.
I don't know if it was actually Christopher Alexander's influence on my work, because it was kind of what I did naturally. But it was when I read Christopher Alexander that he was the first person who named what I felt like was true and what felt right to me about design and about building and about architecture. And you find 2 camps of people who get Christopher Alexander and people who don't. And I'm deeply, deeply in the camp of understanding so much of what Christopher Alexander says, and it really speaks to me. He talks a lot about the places that make us feel more whole and more complete when we're in them. He calls it the quality without a name, which isn't all that helpful. But I think it's true that we all know those places when you're in them, that you do feel more whole and complete and more settled and more right and more emotional, maybe. I think some places resonate emotionally with us more than others. On the opposite end of the spectrum, I think there are many places that feel alienating. And we all know those places too. So he talks about a timeless way of building that people have been doing for the last 1,000 years, where the people that use the space and the natural rhythms of the space are the things that are primarily taken into consideration when making a place.
What are some of the elements that you consider when creating a space? I mean, is it sound? Is it color? Is it smell? It's
all those things. But it's also, from the beginning, it's about listening to the people that have been around the place. I'm naturally drawn a little bit more to places already in existence. I mean, like the last hotel I did, the St. Vincent in New Orleans, was an orphanage that was built during the Civil War. I find that places that have a history already are an easier jumping off place to tell a story. When you're starting out to build something brand new now, particularly in my business, well, it's in any kind of development business you can really think of. Developers, people bringing the money to the table, give a direction to the architect and the designers and everybody else to maximize space. Land costs a lot almost anywhere you are in any kind of big city. And so you want to maximize every inch of a place. You go up really high, you make it as dense as possible. Those aren't the places that interest me. And so I think I'm naturally drawn to reuse or rehab of existing spaces. So from the beginning, I want to look at the things that are around that place. Like, what's the neighborhood like? What do the people do there? What are the building materials? What's in harmony with the place itself? We live in a time where we put Tuscan villages in the suburbs. Like, no. I mean, like, why a Tuscan village? So I think it's the opposite of what I want to do. I want to make beautiful places that emotionally resonate with people.
Well, I'm going to retract the word vibe because I think there is a more appropriate word for Liz Lambert projects. And the word that I would use is soul.
That's a better word. I'm okay with vibe too. I mean, I like a vibe. I like soul. I mean, if you ask, like, what is it that's important? I'm thinking about all of your senses. I'm thinking about what visually do you see? I'm thinking about color. I'm thinking about what do you hear? What about music? I'm thinking about smell. That's something that has a real emotional resonance. It's one of the first things to tip you off that you're in a certain place.
Something like smell, how does that manifest itself in any other properties? Can you give an example?
Sure. I think St. Cecilia, back in my time, I don't know if they still do it, but we burned nagchampa in the gardens and in big sticks, and you didn't really know where it was coming from. And, part of the sense of place I wanted you to have being at the St. Cecilia was to kind of bring you back to another era. And I think that nagchampa was completely appropriate for that.
You've said that a lot of people fail in business because they don't have operational vigor, that they may understand the aesthetic part of things, but they don't necessarily understand the business side of things. And you've also said that during the time that you were doing the St. Cecilia, that you were auditing business classes at UT just to get a better understanding of things. And more specifically, that a hotel is a living, breathing thing. And that if you walk away from it after you've just put this thing up, it's not going to work.
Right. It might work, but it wouldn't necessarily work the way I would want it to work. I think that a lot of people can create beautiful spaces, and a lot of people do create beautiful places. But a hotel is a living, breathing thing. And the best hotels to me are ones that get better over the years as they're layered and layered with people's stories and events that happen there and things that happen there. And, we go to hotels for lots of different reasons. And a lot of times they're sad reasons, but more often they're happy occasions. People get married there. They conceive babies in hotels. They have birthdays. They reunite with people. Momentous and quotidian things happen in hotels, but they're emotional places at their best. And I think part of the pull of this business for me is not just in creating the place in the first place or deciding about the style of service on day one, but it's about how to continue to breathe life into the day-to-day operation of the hotel. And that can take a lot of different forms, but I think it is about programming. It's about paying attention to the guest. It's about how to deliver the right kind of service. So I do think that it's important to understand how to operate the hotel and continue its story.
Well, you've said that it's the cross-section of guests, employees, and investors and sort of that symbiotic relationship.
That's right. My friend Chip Conley, one of his earliest books was a book called Peak, where he talks about that sort of trinity of the guest, the employee, and the investor. And those are the three things that you really need to find a way to serve. The guest is an obvious one, but the employee, to me, is incredibly important in your mission as a hotel. I mean, the guest, their first interaction are with employees, whether it's on the phone or at the front desk or the bellman walking you to a room or whoever it is. And that's the person you're going to interface with as a guest all the time. And you can tell when people like their jobs. You can tell when people feel ownership in a place. You can tell when people feel cared for or excited about what they're doing. And not only is it the right thing to do to take care of that employee and have them feel real ownership, but it's also really good business. And the investor is also the obvious one. I mean, you're not going to be continuing on in this business if you're not making returns for the investor and have them interested in doing it again and again.
It seems in this current market, from hotels to brands to fashion to coffee, there's this mentality that the best way to do things is to grow as quickly as you can, as big as you can, and try and get as much value as you can and then sell your asset. You have said instead of growing to sell, you would rather create an asset that gets better over time. Can you expand on that a bit?
You see a lot of people in this business these days growing brands and trying to grow them as quickly as possible and to get as big as possible to spin them off and sell them. I'm not really interested in that. I'd much rather have the long-term prospect of a great hotel that becomes better and better over time and continues to pay dividends and is financially successful over time.
So thoughtful growth instead of mindless growth.
Thank you. Thoughtful growth rather than mindless growth.
You said that in an interview. I'm paraphrasing you, to be fair. Obviously, the case can be made for making as much money as possible, but that
Sure,
seems
absolutely.
And obviously, you need to keep the lights on.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not against people that want to make as much money as possible. I mean, if that's the goal, and that's the goal of a lot of companies, and I'm not here to shame anybody for that goal. To me, though, life is more interesting when there's some to create things that have some more meaning and that affect people's lives in a deeper way. And a lot of times making as much money as you possibly can at the moment sometimes is in conflict with the other goal.
In your experience, do you find that it builds brand loyalty and guest loyalty by doing it thoughtfully as opposed to just turn and burn and get as many people in and out as possible?
Well, I mean, I think that there's probably, yes, is the short answer to that. I think that's true. But again, I'm not trying to grow as slowly. I've never been anti-growth. I'm just trying to grow thoughtfully. And it takes people to do that, and it takes people to pay attention. And sometimes companies grow so quickly that all they're about is growth. You know, the hotels that you go into, they might have cared in the first year or two, but they could not give a fuck anymore. People don't care about their jobs that much. You can feel it in the air when you're in a place that is kind of, they're done, right? And then you've been in hotels where they're great forever. I mean, you feel like the people there care and the room is well tended to. Just like you could tell the difference between those two experiences. And I find that they're fewer and further between to find those hotels that are really great hotels. I want to make great hotels.
In 2006, you created Bunkhouse. With Bunkhouse, you created 8 properties as well as Joe's Coffee. In 2015, Standard International acquired a majority stake in Bunkhouse. 2017, Sansiri, a Thai company, acquired 35% of Standard and board control, thereby effectively acquiring Bunkhouse.
You stated that very well. You followed that whole sequence, yes.
In 2019, you attempted to buy Bunkhouse back, decided not to, and were ultimately fired.
Correct. For being what was it? An unmanageable employee.
All business aside, and I want to ask this question, especially after watching your documentary. How does that feel emotionally to have something that you grew out of nothing taken away from you?
Oh, it's funny. I think about it a lot these days, and I was trying to figure out why, just in the last month or two, I've thought about it more. And I think it's because I'm still down here on South Congress, so I pass by the San Jose, or I stop at Joe's Coffee, or something like that. And it's funny. It's like, there's been a real turn of the page for me. How it felt was really, really awful and really devastating. And now it's been a couple of years, and I've found myself on my feet, probably in a better place. And I still feel emotional about it. I don't want those properties back right now. And I'm really glad where I've ended up. And I think that my best work is ahead of me somehow. So I'm really happy, but I'm still sad. It feels in a way like my legacy got taken. The San Jose was the first hotel I did. All I want is the best for it, but it feels like abruptly the story stopped somehow. At the time, it felt it was the hardest thing I've ever been through. Maybe not the hardest. I take that back. But one of the hardest things I've ever been through. And it wasn't just about that. There was sort of this legacy of properties. It was about the family that had grown up with me in the hotel business. A lot of the people that I'd worked with for 15 years, even before Bunkhouse came into being. Because there were people that started their careers in the hotel business there. We were young, we didn't know what we were doing, we made it up together. And one reason Bunkhouse was so great and resonated with so many people, I think, is because we did do it differently. We were irreverent, and we were having lots of fun, and we were working really hard, and I think we were making a difference. So, I look back on it, and I'm sorry for the way it went down. This isn't a new story. I'm not the first founder that ever got fired from their own company. It's almost a daily story these days, is that the person that founds a company disagrees with the vision of the new owners, and whether it be the vision or the management or day-to-day operations, they are no longer needed, and they're tossed or fired or whatever it may be. I totally didn't see it coming. I never thought I'd get fired. So first of all, there was shock, and then there was a great bereavement. I went through a lot of grief. So it was an interesting time because it was also, my wife and I had just had a baby. I think Lyndon was probably maybe a year old when I got fired. And I didn't know what I was doing or what I was going to do. So it was emotionally a very layered thing to go through.
You end the film with a Joan Didion quote: "A place belongs forever to whoever claims it hardest, remembers it most obsessively, wrenches it from itself, shapes it, renders it, loves it so radically that he makes it in his own image."
Yeah, it's from the White Album.
Is that how you feel about the San Jose?
Oh, completely, for sure. It will always be my baby. I think that's why I feel like it's funny. Like I do feel like a complete turn of the page these days, but I do still feel emotional about the San Jose, maybe more than any of them. And I think it's because that's where I started.
Your whole career, from law to hospitality, has essentially been about people. Looking back, what have you learned about people?
People are your greatest asset. People are what makes everything happen. I mean, surround yourself with the right people and who are talented, and let them go. Learn to trust each other, and you can do just about anything with that group of people.
What surprised you about people?
That people aren't always straightforward and honest. I'm always surprised at people that don't do what they'll say they'll do and aren't straightforward about it. It's always surprising to me that you meet somebody or you do business with somebody, or you work with somebody who can't come to the table and really work something out with you in an honest and kind way.
A few years ago, you and your wife had a child. How did that change your view on mortality?
Oh, God, I think about it all the time. I'm obviously a much older first-time mother. Lyndon just turned, he's 3, and, I do the math all the time in my head. So but it makes me feel better about mortality at the same time. It's like you can't explain it to anybody. It's both terrifying and it makes you feel comforted in the same time.
So your undergraduate degree is in humanities, specifically poetry. When you look back on this portion of your career and you look at all the properties, do you see poems?
Yeah, kind of, I do. That's a really interesting way to put it. Each one of them is a poem to me. I think when you're making a place, you're doing the same thing you're doing when you're writing a poem. They're both evocative. They both take on lives of their own. They have different meaning to different people. And I definitely tend to them and obsess about them in the same way.
This is the first time I've been back in Austin in about 7 years, and we are down here on South Congress, and it has changed considerably in the last 7 years, and more so even in the last 10 to 15 years I've been coming here for work. There is some debate online as to the exact time frame, but in the early 2000s, a phrase began to appear on T-shirts and bumper stickers in Austin that read, "Keep Austin Weird." And as I walk around South Congress and notice substantial amount of change, I've got to ask you, is Austin still weird?
Oh my God, I hope so. I really hope that it's one of my biggest concerns. I mean, Austin was built on cheap tacos, cheap beer. Some people say chips and guitars, meaning microchips and guitars. One of the biggest fears is that those creative people will no longer be able to live in Austin. I would not be able to open the San Jose today if I'd just come to Austin as a young person, just wanting to try something out. So I don't know. I still think the spirit of Austin is weird. I think it's imbued with outlaw culture, but there are ton of really rich people moving to Austin. You never want a place to be stuck in time. And there are a lot of good things about the new Austin, from food to culture to different places. But yeah, I worry about it all the time.
How do you define success?
There was a period of time where I was reading a lot of Emerson because I still own El Cosmico out in Marfa, which is the tent and trailer and teepee hotel. And when we do programming out there, we think a lot about a couple of things. I think a lot about the Whole Earth catalog, and its tagline was access to tools. There was this whole Emersonian bent to both the Whole Earth catalog and also to El Cosmico that is about self-reliance that I've always loved. When we do programming, we do classes, whether it be welding or, leatherworking or, home brewing your own beer. There's always been a bit of teaching people to be self-reliant that's baked into it. So there's a quote by Emerson. Somebody has asked him, what is success? And he says, to laugh often and much, to win the respect of intelligent people and the affection of children, to earn the appreciation of honest critics and endure the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate the beauty, to find the best in others, to leave the world a bit better, whether by a child, a garden patch, or a redeemed social situation. To know even one life has breathed easier because you've lived. This is to have succeeded. I thought it was pretty good.
How do you define failure?
I know you probably get this answer all the time, that if you're ever going to do anything, you're going to have to fail over and over and over again. I don't know if it's actually failure that makes you a better person, or I think that that's too easy. I think it's about what you do with the failure or how you talk about that failure, because I think the moment you begin to talk about it, it's really kind of no longer a failure. You're casting it in a different way. It's either a lesson learned, or it's a pivot, or it's, a recalculation. You've no longer called it a failure. So I thought about this because I thought, again, that you might ask that. And I'm not sure, because I don't know that I would consider any of the stupid stuff I've done or the miscalculations I've made, even the worst ones, really a failure.
Can you think of a failure that perhaps at the time felt completely overwhelming, but ultimately set you up for success?
Yeah. I mean, the whole bunkhouse situation, again, it's layered because I still feel emotional about it. I still miss that family I created. I worry about the legacy of those hotels and, the life that was breathed into them that probably is no longer important to them. But, and I feel like I probably made mistakes along the way and thinking it would turn out differently when I sold the majority of my shares in Bunkhouse to Standard. And it didn't turn out the way I thought it would. The thing about it is I got fired I never would have left that job. I would have the captain that would have gone down with the ship. So I'm not saying it's okay that it happened the way it happened, but I do feel like I've turned out better for it. I feel like I've moved on and I've joined a company that I care a lot about. I'm doing some other things that are really interesting to me. I feel like it relieved me of a struggle I was locked into.
How do you define happiness?
My wife and my kid, and that's such a, I have a really wonderful 3-year-old son, and it makes me so happy just to watch him in the world.
What would you say to 18-year-old Liz?
You're not going to believe how interesting this is going to be.
How would you describe what you do for a living?
My first impulse is to tell you that I'm a storyteller. People would say what I do is that I'm a hotelier, but I think it is about telling stories. I think it's also about creating community. I think it's about bringing people together in interesting ways.
Liz Lambert, thank you for speaking with me.
Thanks, Noah. It was fun.
The Days Between is a production of Noah Abrams Studio. Story editing by Andrew Henry. Mixing and mastering by Greg Henkin. Website and design by John Fisher. Theme music is by Evo. The Days Between can be found online at www.thedaysbetweenpodcast.com and on Instagram at The Days Between Podcast. My name is Noah Abrams. Thanks for listening.